Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. I had a friend at the shooting today. Pulled up to work. It's a gun-free zone, so he took his weapon out, secured it in his car, got out of his car, locked his car, gunfire rang out. Looked like, from the photo, 50 yards away. So every good guy with a gun out there knows what happened next. He unlocked his car, grabbed that weapon, and moved to engage the threat, right? No, of course not. Because this isn't the comment section, this is real life. He went to the federal building where there's armed security and they locked it down. Everybody has this image that they're a superhero or supervillain, and they know how they're going to respond. You don't. You don't. Most people would do what he did. 96% of people would do what he did. And before we get into this, so I don't forget, I think he made the right call. I think he made the right call. He's not ex-military, not an ex-cop, not trained and conditioned to kill. Untrained people do one thing really well in combat: die in a very loud and grotesque manner. He did the right thing. That's the right call for him to make. There's this prevailing myth of the good guy with a gun. And it's just utterly false. It's utterly false. And the gun crowd knows it's utterly false, too. They have to know it, because it's their slogan. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. You'll say that to a gun control advocate. But for some reason, when you go to the store and buy a Mark 23, all of a sudden you're an operator. It's not how it works. The gun doesn't make the man. And that concept is what's fueling a lot of these shootings. That violence is the answer. Violence is always the answer. And that you've got to be capable of this. Most people aren't. The overwhelming majority of people aren't. 4%. If you want to look into that topic, there's a series of books by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. On Killing is the one I recommend. And I know somebody brought him up in the comment section. That's just serendipity. That completely random that we're talking about him today. I know you wanted to discuss him training cops now. And believe me, there's going to be a video on that. But 4% of people are miswired to be capable of killing with no issues. They don't suffer the psychological consequences of killing, and they don't have to overcome psychological barriers to do it. 4% of people. Everybody else needs to be conditioned to do that. Everybody else. What makes the grass grow green? Somebody just screamed back at their screen. Blood, blood, blood. I hope you weren't at work, because if you were, now you look like a psycho. But you're conditioned to do that, right? It's part of it. The profession of arms as a whole has methods of conditioning people to be capable of killing. That's where it begins. Right there at Benning. That's where it starts. Later on, those pop-up metal targets, right? Does that really prepare you for combat? No, of course not, because that's not what they're teaching you. They're conditioning you to kill. Target, shoot it. Target, shoot it. They're conditioning you. That's what it is. Because the military understands only 4% of people are naturally wired that way. Now, I know somebody's going to bring up that FBI survey that is often pointed to by people who subscribe to the good guy with a gun theory, that, out of 50 mass shootings in 2016 and 2017, good guy stopped them 8 times. That's true. That is true. However, it's a critically flawed survey, and we'll talk about that, but 8 shooters were stopped. 4 times the people that did it were unarmed. Only 2 times did they exchange gunfire with the person and end the threat. 2 is what percent of 50. Even in a study that flawed, that didn't take into account how many people were armed and whether or not people chose not to act or anything like that, the number is still 4%. It's it's a constant and has been since this topic really started being looked at in World War II. So with all of this out there, the idea, good guy with a gun, get rid of gun-free zones, therefore more people are armed, we'll stop it. It's just false. It's not how it works. It's not going to work. And besides, I know there's a correlation between mass shootings and gun-free zones, but is it causation? Most places where large amounts of people gather, which is kind of a requirement for a mass shooting, are gun-free zones. Now, evidence to the contrary, to kind of dispel this correlation, since Columbine, every school has somebody with body armor and a gun there. Has the rate of school shooting slowed? No, of course not. Not everybody in the world is part of that 4%, but every mass shooter is. They don't care. That's not even going to factor into their equation. Most of them don't plan on walking out anyway. So obviously this goes to the whole arming of teachers thing. I did a video on it. I'll link it. It's a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. This is not a problem that's going to be solved with legislation. It's a cultural thing. We've got to get rid of the idea that the gun makes the man. That's step one. It's a tool, and it needs to be remembered that it's simply a tool. It doesn't make you something special because you own a gun. Now, as far as the psychological aspects, a teacher doesn't have to rush headlong into gunfire. A teacher's under attack, fight, flight, or freeze. They'll choose one. If they choose fight and they happen to be armed, it will make them more effective in the fight. Is this going to be a grand determining factor in mass shootings at schools? No, of course not. And that's assuming it's all done right. And as discussed in that video, it won't be. It won't be. So how does this relate to the Parkland cop? Why am I holding them to two different standards? Because one person was part of the profession of arms. One person was trained. One person, in my opinion, had a duty to intervene to save those kids. I know the Supreme Court disagrees with me on that, and that's fine. They've been wrong before. The good guy with a gun, it's not a real thing. It's not a real... it's not a theory that you can base domestic policy on. And in fact, to me, the concept that all of a sudden, if somebody has a gun, they're more of a man, it's part of the problem, not part of the solution. Because to that 4%, those with that mindset, that weapon, that gun, it's a tool. They're the weapon. Do it with a pocket knife or a rock if they have to, or unarmed, as in that study. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good night.